Well, dear friends, comrades, let us have our friends use their earphones. So, I repeat, dear friends, comrades, if I remember correctly, I believe this is a third March throughout the past 4 years that we've met within the framework of the organization of a European two-day meeting in order to discuss with comrades of ours from other countries of Europe, from the European left, from progressive forces, about crucial European stakes and issues. The discussion that will start today will go on tomorrow, Saturday, and this discussion becomes even more crucial due to the fact that this event of ours coincides with the crucial battle of the Euro elections of May 26th. We'll hear today's speakers elaborate on the matter of how important the elections are. And just because we have already started with a delay, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to this two-day event, and I would like to also welcome the foreign comrades that we have the pleasure to have among us today. And I'll give the floor straight ahead to the president of our party, the prime minister of the country, and candidate of the European left for the year 2014 for the presidency of the Commission, Comrade Alexis Tsipras. Well, to begin with, I would like to apologize for the fact that I have slightly changed the agenda because of a prior engagement, which will unfortunately not allow me to come tomorrow as scheduled. So I'll be making my contribution today. I suppose that I've changed the program, but I do hope and trust that this two-day meeting will be substantial by all means. Two-day meeting of dialogue in order to talk about the crucial battle that we have ahead of us. Before I formulate certain thoughts of mine as an introduction, and given the fact that today is a day that all of us have been overwhelmed by an abhorrent event that took place thousands of kilometers away. However, it feels as if it happened next to us. So first of all, I'd like to express my abhorrence. I would like to condemn in the most absolute of ways this abhorrent action of the far-right terrorism, this time in New Zealand, in a country which is far away. However, I believe that no one in this day and age is far enough in order to be safe against maniacs, assassins, and enthusiasts of national thoughts, and all these people that promote Islamophobia, intolerance, the hatred for whoever is different, for whatever is different. And they do this, and this is the most infuriating of things, they do this even in their very formal capacities, that is, from national governments or using their capacity as members of the European Parliament. Dear friends, comrades, it is an honor for me to be among you this evening within the framework of this organization of the left to discuss the crucial European elections in the future that lies ahead of us. And I'd like to wish all parties of the European left strength, and I'd like to wish them the best for the campaign that we have ahead of us. But first and foremost, I'd like to wish success to the candidates of the European left for the presidency of the European Commission, Nico and Violeta Tomic, that will fight in order to signify another proposal for the building of our European future. And of course, since Yiannis mentioned it, I can't help but think back to the year 2014, that is 5 years ago, when I had the great honor to be a candidate myself, representing the European left. And I reminisce this beautiful fight that we fought in the midst of the political juncture of that period. We struggled in order to awaken the European political leadership and raise awareness vis-à-vis the risk of establishment of a neoliberal agenda in Europe. The fight that we fought in order to highlight the risks behind the disastrous austerity policies that already back then had started undermining the unity of Europe, dealt a fatal injury to the sentiments of solidarity among European peoples, and also dealt a blow to the prestige, the credibility and the acceptance of European institutions by European citizens. And the truth is that the European left has been the one that always tried to mediate this rampant pace of neoliberalism in Europe before the advent of the crisis. In the year 2014, that is during the previous Euro elections, we had been in the midst of the major banking and financial crisis for 5 years already, and 4 countries of the EU, regional countries, had started participating in bailout programs, all of which were identical and were based on the same inefficient principles and wrong recipes, principles inspired by the hardest, even scientifically marginalized versions of neoliberalism, I would say. Principles that blatantly ignored the necessary agenda for growth. They showed utter indifference to what concerned the demands of working people and, of course, the need to restructure the debts of the European states, and the importance of societies standing on their own feet, achieving true economy, fostering consumption and production in order to be able to pay these exorbitant state debts and banking debts. Back then, perhaps we were deep in the midst of the crisis. However, we had the optimism and the strength that social movements had given us, and mobilizations almost anywhere in Europe against austerity, especially in the south, the optimism and the strength that we could fight against almighty powers that determined how things would be in Europe. Of course, since that time, many things have happened. However, I believe that if we can draw a first conclusion today, 5 years after that, and a little bit before embarking on a new campaign for European elections, I suppose that we could say that the criticism we made publicly 5 years ago, starting with the Euro elections of 2014, and our warning against a Europe that was back then reminiscent of the somnambulist that is moving towards a cliff or a precipice, and today, of course, things are worse. Our criticism and warning has proven right in the 5 years that have lapsed since that time. Our effort here in Greece in order to put an end to austerity clashed with the walls of the violent reaction of the European institutions. We had exciting times, and we also had difficult times. For the first time in a Eurozone country, did we have an electoral triumph for the left and all the forces that are clearly against extreme austerity policies, neoliberal policies, that is. So we have had exciting times, but also times of conflict, of violent conflict, intense conflict rather, we have had difficult times as well. However, for all intents and purposes, we can say that today our effort here in Greece, efforts to put an end to austerity through conflicts and through difficult compromises, has been treading a road that seems to be leading to a clear-cut horizon and to a clearing in the forest. So we've started building a new social state with solid foundations. We brought our economy back in orbit of growth and development. We rationalized and turned around public finance, but mainly we managed to complete an adaptation program targeting structural reform, but mainly we've been able to do this protecting these popular forces and the classes of societies that we've committed ourselves to serving, the many and the weak. And of course we created the preconditions for important victories for the forces of labor in order to bring back collective bargaining agreements, labor rights, because we want a financial growth that will be based on labor and will not be based on the elimination or annihilation of labor, because, as against neoliberals, we don't believe that reduction of unemployment is an outcome of development, but we consider this to be a prerequisite.
Now, of course, not to monopolize the discussion on the basis of what happened to Greece, I should like to say that in other parts and in other areas of Europe, we also had examples where a lot of hardship, a lot of about turns. We did have important victories as well, and I'm referring specifically to Portugal, where the progressive powers, the socialists, the communists, the Greens, the environmentalists came all of a sudden. It was unprecedented, and they came together in the programming period and they formed a government in order to adopt a program that would allow them to leave austerity and high unemployment, whereas before we saw a similar dialogue emerging between those progressive powers in Spain as well, that had to do with labor, with the restoring of labor and working rights, and for the increase of public expenditure in order to boost and enhance economy as a whole. The things we achieved in the countries of the South may have been important, where the progressive powers were victorious, but we must admit at this point that in the bigger picture of Europe, this is not enough. It's not enough to shape, to create an optimistic picture for the future, because generally speaking, all over Europe, the same ineffective and hostile to the people and primarily to the weaker and the many dogmas are still dominant. They're still prevailing in the decision-making centers, in the European institutions, as we're used in calling these decision-making centers over the past few years. Now, the same fixations of the neoliberalist financial and economic orthodoxy for the constant enhancement of capital, the constant and perpetual profits of capital to the detriment of waged labor, and the same practices of lack of accountability, of lack of democratic legitimacy, those same practices of technocratic governance and despising the will of the people, and of course despising the weaker countries, the smaller countries, in relation to their financial power and their power and strength in the decision-making centers. So it is from this point of view that one would say, to bring me to the original train of thought of my speech here, 5 years ago we had warned people that this would happen. And consequently, no one can say that, at least for us, it wasn't expected. It wasn't anticipated to see this wave of nationalistic re-emergence that we saw in Europe in the years since the previous European Parliament elections. Now, since we're talking about a nationalistic resurgence and re-emergence, I would like to take us back to one that is becoming a thriller, as it were, because we can't see in the foreseeable future what the outcome will be. And we have lost any sense of being able to predict what will happen. And, of course, I'm talking about the infamous Brexit. Brexit that has put such an important country of Europe in an unprecedented political crisis for the past 3 years, which it seems unable to exit. It is those powers that defended that prospect, and I'm talking about the individuals and the leadership that actually had propaganda in favor of all that, disappeared. And everyone is trying to find a way to solve a crossword puzzle that is very difficult to solve. But it's not just Brexit. It's also the sad, strengthening emergence of extreme right, xenophobic, racist powers in a number of European countries, even in some who were famous for their democratic traditions and for the stability of their political institutions in the past. It is exactly on this substrate of crisis. In all these countries, the extreme right succeeded in expressing anger, the disappointment of the public masses, and primarily to gain from the dissatisfaction that had been caused by the blatant failures of the European construct and the management of the big financial crisis. However, and this is something we should not miss in our point of view, the extreme right does express the rage and the disappointment of popular powers, but it is not against the interests, the almighty interests of the elites in each and every country, of the powerful, of the powers that be. It does express anger and disappointment, but it does not represent the claims and the wants of the many. It appears as a systemic power across the chart, across the map, but not in the least does it go against the political status quo. It does not attempt in the very least to reduce the dominance of capital on the working powers. Quite the contrary. Wherever such powers have actually succeeded in gaining power and to come into power to undertake positions of government, they promote and they boost the most extreme neoliberal economic reforms. Such an example are the reforms of Viktor Orban in Hungary, on the exorbitant domination of capital on working hours, on the working people, on wages, and similar reforms are being promoted by people who think like him in Austria and other countries. So we should never forget that the extreme right shares with neoliberalism the same political philosophy, the same contempt for the weak, for the defeated, the same wish for the crushing, and please allow me at this point to say the pogrom, the cleansing out of those who refuse to adapt. And what is disappointing is that this dominant dogma, this neoliberal economic religion of sorts, is shifting from the political vehicle of the mediocre parties, or of the parties of the mediocre right, from the traditional conservative parties that had, well, most of them acceded to the neoliberal dogma, onto the political vehicle of the far right, of the extreme right, which is why we're now faced with a particularly dangerous phenomenon. Now, I promised that I wouldn't take too long. I must say, in conclusion, that we still have another 2 months until these very crucial European elections. And I would say that these European elections, actually, are of an existential nature for the very European Union. It is the first time they're so crucial and critical since the very foundation and establishment of the European Union, because these relations, the power relations that they will create, appear menacing. As in relation to the problems rather that we have to face, and it's not just the economic crisis. The problems we have to manage consist in whether the European Union can still maintain the same institutional framework it has and the same principles it was based on when it was established. So we have 2 or 3 months until these European elections, and we, the powers of left, have the duty to prioritize the political fronts that we have in front of us, before us. So we believe that we need to fight this battle on 2 fronts. Against austerity and neoliberalism, the front that we promoted and we showcased 4 years ago, but also against the extreme right and this hatred, this racist hatred. And we must not allow for much longer to allow the far right to benefit, this new far right of Europe to benefit from this expression of rage and anger, which gives the impression many a time, although in each and every country its key feature and characteristic is the hatred for the other and this nationalistic entrenchment, it gives the opportunity of a new international and global expression, which is of the darkest possible kind. But I would say that in order to make this happen, it is not enough, not that it's not necessary, but it does not suffice to have an anti-neoliberal and Eurosceptical or Eurocritical program. At the same time, we must be in a position to offer the European peoples, the citizens we're addressing, also a modern and convincing alternative, in order to uproot the hatred and the fear that the far right is being nourished on. We must be able not only to point out the problem, but also to produce answers and political paradigms and examples that are specific for the improvement of the people, because such a program is not just one that proclaims the anti-capitalist tendency we have on each and every page of its text, but it's a program that shows that we are both ready and capable to work with the people to change things, to change their lives, to change their everyday lives, not in the distant and uncertain future, but today. Now, I have a feeling that the European left and its parties are not lacking in strategic vision or strategy as a whole. We do have strategy. It may be expressed in this beautiful motto, which is a Europe for the many. A united democratic Europe, reborn on the basis of a new contract on equality and environmental sustainability. In order to manage to stop the neoliberal dominance and, albeit with baby steps, to make this Europe of the many a reality, what we need is not only to talk about the many, but in my opinion, what we primarily need is to bring them close to us. In a nutshell, and simply put, apart from a strategy and a program for the many, the European left needs to find the way, but also to believe that it needs to find the way to make an alliance with the many. This is what we need. We need the widest possible alliance with the social groups and strata that are isolated and marginal, with those who were called upon to pay the price of an international crisis that they themselves did not create, but also with the political powers that agree, albeit with contradictions and many differences amongst us, but with all those political powers that agree that Europe and its peoples need an urgent change of course. What we need is a wide political and social and progressive alliance. A progressive alliance, the key aim of which is to intercept the extreme right and neoliberalism. It is, I would say, our historical duty to realize just how crucial these moments are for Europe. And in that sense to promote and to work and to struggle together with all those political and social powers despite our differences in order to change today's reality and to show in practice that social inequalities are not a natural phenomenon, as the neoliberals claim, and that it is not the fault of the immigrants and the refugees, the weak neighbor for these problems and the social and the existential crisis of Europe, as is the claim of the racist and xenophobic extreme right. To be convincing, we must take the things of internationalism, of the new social movements and of our social heritage from the beginning, to break free from the ethnocentricity and this particular nationalism of specific parts of the left that attempt to respond to this rise of the right in the most self-destructive and detrimental, deleterious, I would say, way. We need a radical program, much more radical than the one presented by the social democracy in Europe today, and which also bears part of the responsibility for shifting towards this dominant opinion in many countries, this dominant opinion of neoliberalism. But what we need is a clear-cut position vis-à-vis Europe. Yes to a radical program, much more radical than those of the Social Democrats, much more radical than that of the Greens, but also a clear-cut position vis-à-vis the question of whether we're with Europe or not, or whether we wish to return to the nation-state situation, the logic and the rationale that social strata and social classes in each country will find the solution fighting against the similar movements in neighboring countries. Now, such a logic or such a rationale is outside our own concept and vision of where the field and the site of this social and class confrontation exists. For us, it exists in Europe, and there is where we must fight the battles.
Αυτή την κατεύθυνση.
Well, it is to that end that we here in Greece have undertaken initiative in view of the Euro elections, and we have invited all progressive forces of the country with self-confidence and courage. We have invited all these forces that understand the crucial stake at work here. They understand our need to have a head-on conflict with neoliberalism and the far right. To join forces, I believe that with the same self-confidence and courage we need as a group of the European left to address Europe more generally speaking. And we need to address and reach out to progressive forces, despite our differences, from Greens and Socialists that have changed their political position, to the radicals of the left without any exclusion. and do that within the framework of a big unification front for the Europe of the many, in order to safeguard democracy, in order to apply politics fostering equality and equitable development, in order to stop this fascist direction in the public domain and public politics in Europe in these 2 months that lie ahead of us. Therefore, I believe that we, as a European left, need to commit ourselves to the pursuit of this great objective, and do that with bravery, courage and solidarity. This is the historic role of the left, to take things one step forward to the benefit of peoples, and not to remain siloed in the dormitories of political self-certainty. As Syriza, as a force which is a point of reference, I believe, today for the left, and not only in Europe, I would say, we declare that we are present. In the Greek language, both present men and present women, because we should never forget the feminist dimension to our discourse. So we declare that we are present here for this political battle, and I am optimistic. I have the optimistic volition, for all intents and purposes, in order to be clear. I have the optimism that our willingness and desire to move forward can afford us, that we can truly achieve important things if we so dare. So I believe that despite adversities and political correlations, the day after the Euro elections will be a day during which we'll have the union of political forces in Europe that will be able to put a stop to the advent and the raid of fascism and the far right. It is with these thoughts that I hope I have contributed something to your discussion, and I do hope and trust that will be a conducive and productive one. Thank you very much. Well, after thanking Comrade Tsipras, I shall present to you the speakers one by one in their turn. But before I give the floor to the first of our speakers, I need to say certain things as an introduction for the dual candidacy that the European left has been fostering for the symbolic fight for the presidency of the Commission, since one of the 2 candidates just so happens to be sitting next to me and will be given the floor first. The second candidate, the European Left Party, has decided to be represented equally and have a dual candidacy which reflects the equal representation of the genders. She's absent today because you understand that the European campaign has a lot of obligations scheduled, so everything needs to be done by May 26th. I'll speak about her a little bit. It's Violeta Tomic from Slovenia. Symbolically, we would say that Violeta represents the world of culture and art. And on the other hand, she is representing Balkans and the Eastern Europe, the new countries of the European Union. She comes from Slovenia. She's an MP of the Slovenian National Assembly, that is Parliament of Slovenia, from the party of the left. I ought to say, drawing on personal experience in Syriza, that it was established in the year 2014, and within very few months of existence, not only did it make it and become elected in the parliament, but they superseded Social Democrats in Slovenia with more than 6%. In the second victory, in the second fight, 9%, and we hope that they'll be represented in the European Parliament. The second, let me say, Violeta Tomic will also be in charge of the Euro ballot in the EU. We need high percentages. We do hope and trust that the left will make it. The second candidate of the European left is sitting by my side and will be given the floor first, Nico. He has a dual citizenship, Spanish and Belgian, and in this fight of ours, he'll be representing the other part of Europe, Western Europe, but he'll be representing the European South as well, because he also comes from Spain, and at the same time he'll be representing the world of labor, since throughout his adult life he's been fighting, working for Belgian trade unions and the General Federation of Laborers of Belgium, FGTB. In the year 1997, he was elected General Secretary of this union. So let's wish to both of them strength and courage in the pre-election fight of the European left, and give the floor to Nico.
Merci. Je suis vraiment très heureux d'être ici. Et je voudrais dire à Alexis Tsipras que je suis...
I'm very pleased to be here, and I'd like to tell Alexis Tsipras that I too am very happy to follow his example and take things from where he left them back in the year 2014. Thank you. For many years, with my friend who is in the room, in all events, in all strikes, in the years spanning 2010 to 2016, I kept reiterating our slogan that we are all Greeks. So I conveyed this short message, this slogan, if you wish, because what was happening in Greece, we had forecasted would happen in the rest of Europe. And back then, in 2009, working in the FGTB trade union and in the metalworking sector, in a note, we had written, Greece is reminiscent of the times of 1936. So, as people working in the field of metalworking, we need to show our solidarity to Greece. We need to support all movements that our comrades in this country participated in. I believe that we were not wrong. After Greece, we had Portugal, Spain, Italy, then Belgium. They imposed austerity plans on all of us everywhere. They curtailed any room that we had for collective bargaining. The same thing that happened here in Greece happened in all other places. My son is 36 years old, I must say. We often say that things have come to such an end that he's bound to lead a worse life compared to his parents. He was born in 1993. If you think about it, neoliberal policies started being implemented precisely back then. When I started working, my pension was a certainty. My pension would allow me to lead a decent life in case of illness. I would have the money that would allow me to pay for the drugs that I needed in Belgium. And if I were to lose my job, I would get an unemployment benefit that would also allow me to make ends meet during that period of time with decency and dignity. When I see things today and the reality of my son, who is 36 years old, with a university degree far more important than mine, I understand that if he is ever unemployed, he will not receive the same benefits I would have received had I been in his position. He will not have a decent pension unless he has a private insurance, and his healthcare is far more expensive than mine. It's not only the crisis that is attributable to harsh neoliberalism imposing its agenda. It's all this derogation or divergence of Europe from the Europe of peace that we would have wanted, the Europe of democracy, the Europe that we wanted with a social paradigm that would be progressive. This has been questioned since the year 1983. Europe is not the same as it was at the beginning. It has changed its orbit. It has derailed to a great extent because, simply and clearly, some structures are not democratic in character. I am speaking in particular about the European Central Bank that has been playing a highly negative role. I'm also making mention to different fiscal constraints and limitations that oblige states to follow recommendations like the ones issued by the European Commission. These recommendations are governed by a neoliberal mentality. These are certain comments that I have reached. Hard though they may sound, we can hear the boots sounding around Europe, the galloping sounds of fascism. We heard what Yiannis said to the European Commission. We need to try to put an end to this rampant fascism. We saw the dramatic events that took place yesterday in New Zealand. We had already observed similar instances and actions of the far right, with tombs raided in France, Spain, and the desecration of graves and comrades, my dear friends. I believe that we need to win these European elections. Why is it that I'm saying that? Not only because we do have the willingness and volition to do so, not only because we are convinced of what we are saying, but because barbarism is at the gates. There is a destabilization everywhere in Europe, with all the repercussions that we see in the front line, with the waves of refugees. It's only natural that we have refugees coming because we bomb them on a daily basis. I suppose that if we were in their shoes, we would do the same thing, the exact same things. We would try to protect our families. These destabilization events around Europe are compounded by austerity, harsh austerity, and we have this bouncing back to the nation state. We need to roll up our sleeves and work. There are many forces in Europe that foster the opinion that a different Europe is needed. It's difficult to make our voices heard in the left. There are divergences, differences. What shall we do about Europe? What will happen with treaties? What will happen with a number of questions that divide us today? Unfortunately, I believe, however, that we ought to foster prospects of the right culture in Europe. We need to stop divisions. We need to choose how to live tomorrow. Let me give you an example. Often, we have a certain opinion vis-à-vis society and production. I say this in a provocative way, and I say so frequently. When we go to laborers in factories and nuclear factories, for example, and people working in chemical establishments, some people say that internal combustion motors cause a lot of smog and we need to shut down mines, etc. All this is true. Indeed, in view of climate change and problems, we need to build a society free from nuclear power, etc. However, when we speak to workers and address them and say, yes, the nuclear station where you're working will be closing, the chemical industry will stop existing. Yes, I'm saying this in order to provoke you, to challenge you. I'm being devil's advocate. Okay, we'll put an end to mines and to lots of other establishments. And the left says, okay, we propose an equitable transition. However, I believe that this is not enough. It does not suffice because at the same time, they hear Salvini and Trump tell them, go ahead, try, we'll guarantee that you have enough money to make ends meet for the month. So when I address to people working in these places, Salvini, Trump, and the likes of them manage to attract this audience. So we need to face the challenges. We need to practically address the problems of these people with our vision about what a production system should be like how it is that we can better serve the needs of employees, workers, the needs of the third world, developing world, and the world over, with instruments that would allow us to tackle climatic change. Yes, but also have money to make it, so as to make sure that people can make ends meet. Otherwise, if we fail to do that, we won't be influential. We need to work with environmentalists and Greens in order to come up with joint projects that will respond to the necessity of production instruments to be used to the benefit of society. We'll need to have companies that are operational and functional, not hurting or harming the environment and helping people. I feel comfortable with this position. There is an area in Belgium, Wallonie, we've had a far-right participation in government. They tore to pieces part of our social insurance. They curtailed trade union freedoms to a great extent. They limited the freedoms of citizens. They reduced one's ability to take unionist action. 4 trade unionists will be tried shortly for the trade unionist activities. The people of the left, multifaceted though they may be, different though they may be, should manage to unite every member of the left on a European level. I repeat, on a European level and a local level as well. Let me give you an example. For the first time, as trade unionists, we've shown a strong willingness to be independent from the parties. We invited the 4 parties in Wallonie. We said, okay, socialists, Greens, PTB, communists, come. Let us all have a joint discussion in order to commonly narrate our story to see whether or not we can actually come up with a common left project or agenda. We trade unionists are ready to help you so that this project become a government project and so that you can win power. Post Wallonia, 52 to 60% intention to vote for the left is what we see in Wallonia. It would be a historic mistake not to win a joint government following a joint project in conjunction and collaboration with trade unionists.
So there are a lot of issues that we will have to keep on discussing commonly. It's the issue of European taxation, refugees, the role of the European Central Bank, the role of the European Commission. A whole series of issues. Of course, we will not touch upon these issues today because what we're interested in today is the issue of strategy. And I feel that we need to have global strategies. Now, I mentioned Wallonia in Belgium. We need to have a unification apart from the local labor union level. A few years ago, we created what we call acting in the present. It's a slogan. So the miners, the people who worked in the mines of Wallonia, tried to deal with their problems and resolve them on their own, and they lost from the ArcelorMittal group. We saw the farmers who went to Brussels and emptied thousands of gallons of milk because the prices had dropped. They weren't on their own. What happened? They lost. We saw our colleagues who went there due to the budget cuts from the area of culture. They went on their own to Brussels and they lost. We did propose them to go together a few years ago, because if we all stand together in alliance, we will be able to achieve better things. So united we stand. So we created this movement at the local level, and we developed debates and discussions everywhere, from the smallest village where just one farmer exists to the largest industrial cities, in order to unify Either we're talking about people from the same sector locally or the regional level or at the state level, but also at the European level, we must create a wide front after the European elections so that an alliance of the left, a caucus, rather an alliance of the far right, not to be able to destroy our work and to put us against one another, and neoliberalism and the jungle it proposes will not prevail. So the powers of progress must stand together, and I would like to commit before you to defend this vision for the necessity of a progressive Europe. It's the necessity and the need of a Europe that will not be based on austerity, the need for a Europe that will not scare the workers and will decide to deal with the climate change problems jointly, together with the workers. Thank you very much for your attention, comrades. And I should like to wish you, after the European elections, to be able to start anew with renewed powers and to win all the elections to come in Spain, Greece, Portugal, Poland, in all other countries, in Belgium, of course. It is a necessary step forward to transform Europe. Now, I would like to present your Prime Minister with a gift, because I've been carrying this little star with me. It's of the brigades that defended the Spanish democracy in 1936, and I want to present him with this star. It's from the International Brigades of Spain. Thank you very much indeed. Now we would like to thank Nico, among other things, for the very warm words he used to honor the solidarity struggles in Greece, in which he has actively participated. Now I should like to call to the floor someone who's an old acquaintance of Syriza and of the Greek left. She is the vice chair of the Party of the European Left. Now, most of you, the usual suspects who are usually here in the sector of our party, know her all too well. So, without further ado, it's Maite Mola from the Spanish European Left. Good evening. Thank you very much. I'm particularly happy to be here again, and I would like to thank very much QNGL for this invitation. I should like to thank the international division that prepared today's event. Now, the program we have is very interesting, and I would like to say that the GUE-NGL is a valuable team in the European Parliament. And we must think about what will happen in the immediate future, and to try for this political group, this political team, which is invaluable for me, to keep it from being destroyed. Now, with Dimitris Papadimoulis, and this is something I must say, is someone who must help us keep GUE in action. The PGE is now filing for a dual candidateship for the Spitzen candidates that we say in German. And I don't know why we're using the German term, but like Alexis Tsipras did very well in 2014, he explained in a very appropriate way that it is not a true nomination. Now, this candidacy is a platform, actually, that will allow us to denounce and to say that it is the powers of the majority that will indicate the winner. And in 2014, in all meetings he attended, he had to say that this is not a candidacy and a nomination that is true, that is not an actual nomination, and he did that. Nico must follow the example of Alexis Tsipras of 2014. And the first thing he should say is that this nomination is not a true nomination, it's not a true candidacy, because the Europeans can't vote for him. So thank you, Alexis, for the struggle, for the battle you fought in 2014, when things were much more complicated than then. You made a very important struggle, you made a very important effort, and it was not evident. So maybe you and I can explain why this is not simple or easy, and we'll not do this here now in this room. But it was unbelievable that you accepted to play the role of the candidate for European left at a different time for the party of the European left back then. Now, today we have a wonderful nomination, wonderful candidacy. Times are different. We have a woman, a feminist from the world of culture. It is a compatriot of mine. Nico is an adopted Belgian. He comes from Asturias. He's my friend. He's my comrade. Now, I will not keep on boring you with wonderful things about Nico, because I don't know what he will do next. Now, in any case, he and she will defend the European platform of the party of the European left. But what they will do is that they will defend peace, freedom. They will fight for the rights of all the countries, for their right to live free. Nico and Violeta will represent not only European things, but international things, like those of Venezuela. So, no pasarán, Alexis Tsipras. Long live this motion. So, you know that Alexis spoke about that, and there are 4 political processes spanning across 4 weeks. We have the general elections for the Senate and the Parliament in April. There we have a great unity. We're called Unipodemos there. It is unidas, it's united in the feminine, it's a feminist, it's not united men, it's united women. Together we can, together we women can in Spanish. It's Podemos, it's the government of Catalonia, it's Maria Estel Galicia, it's the Greens of the left, the progressive Greens. So, all together we will progress. And as you said very well, both Alexis and Nico earlier, we must try for all progressive powers to point out in a country like Spain, with millions of women, millions of men who live under dreadful conditions, we must stress and highlight that the left can stand united. There can be unity in the left. We will try and we will succeed. You said that very well, both of you. We need a thread. I will not color it green or red. I'm talking about the European Forum on the 8th, 9th and 10th of November 2019 in Brussels. Nico and Dimitris have already committed to work for that forum, and this forum is a great hope. So after the European elections, We must manage to work together with all powers to bring about a continuation of the Greeks, the Social Democrats, the feminists, the unionists, the young, all the movements. We must show that something like this is feasible. We must work together, and we must change radically the regional, capitalist, racist, macho, homophobic, xenophobic and fascist model. We must build a European area that is socialist, feminist, equitable, that defends human rights, peace and democracy. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the occasion to speak before you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ τη Maite Molla.
We would like to profusely thank Maite Molla, who is always a very enthusiastic speaker, speaking off the cuff. She spoke about the Forum of the Progressive Forces. Given the opportunity, let me say that we started in 2017 in Marseille. At the end of 2018, we had the second event in Bilbao, at the land of the Basques in Spain. And then this is one of the platforms that we've been working on, both in Syria and the European left as a whole, in order to proliferate and expand this dialogue encompassing different forces. And slowly and gradually, this work, perhaps more slowly than we could, however, sufficiently, this work has started bearing fruit. And this is one of the projects we've been working on for the unity of all those who have decided to jointly fight against neoliberalism. Last but not least, of course, Dimitris Papadimoulis, Vice President of the European Parliament, who does not only go to receptions and tea evenings, but throughout his tenure, he truly fought and proved that he fought for what's right for our people in the social agenda in Europe, and he is in charge of the Syriza Eurogroup.
Διαδέχομαι στο βήμα τον πρόεδρο του κόμματός μου και
Well, I'm taking the floor after the president of my party and prime minister of the country, and Nico, who I've been friends with for many a year, and Maite Molla. What they talked about today, we discussed a few months ago together with our secretary, Panos Kourletis, in Bilbao. During the last European Forum, I fully endorse what the previous speakers said. And I would like to emphasize by repeating what Alexis said, that someone called Antonio Gramsci some decades ago had said that we need to have knowledge against pessimism and endorse the optimism of volition, of will. And we have arguments. Whoever would have expected in January 2015 that Tsipras would now be completing his 5th year of Prime Minister tenure, Greece would have broken free from memoranda, that we would have decreased the unemployment rate by 9 units, that we would have increased the lower pay, and that we would be claiming another 4 years. Whoever would have thought, even our friends would have no way of knowing that we would endure this long. We had to compromise because we were faced with divisions of forces, with a punitive intention, and we were insufficiently supported. And the victory of the left in Greece was not followed or imitated by a similar victory in other countries, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. And now that we are treading the road of the post-MOU era and the worst is behind us, we have chosen the arena to fight in, and that is Europe, and we'll do that in conjunction with other progressive forces. But the correlations in Europe have changed. The far right has grown stronger. We have seen a shift of traditional conservative right towards the far right, and now there's an imminent marriage between the far right and the traditional right. And the ring is the Weber candidacy, and the best man is Orban. And what Yiannis said 2 days ago were not accidental. There was heavy criticism when we people of the left and Syriza started it. We started it, and he had to apologize, but he had to do so because it is the choice of a segment of the status quo and the right to join forces with the far right. Well, it appears everywhere in Europe that wherever the traditional right is trying to appropriate the agenda of the far right, it fails. However, this seems to have been becoming the strategy for ever more leading circles. And we have a far right ruling in Austria. And there it proves that it's not an anti-systemic force, that is, of people protesting, but they are more liberal than the liberals themselves. We have a far right in government in Hungary, and officially it pertains to the European group of the Popular Party, together with Kyriakos Mitsotakis. And on the 20th of March, during their meeting, I do not suppose that they'll expel Orban, nor will they suspend his capacities. Why am I saying that? We have negative signs, but we also have a positive sign here today. Thousands of young people took to the streets of cities, big cities, both in Europe and beyond Europe, fighting against climate change and asking for progressive environmentally friendly measures. There are pressures for us to do more, and we ought to, as the right, despite our differences, we ought to be a driving force for radical change for every country. Separately in Europe as a whole, we ought to take initiatives. It is our duty to take initiatives in order to put an end to a regression that is ushered by the rise of the far right and the dominance of neoliberal recipes. But we need to do that in order to promote goals of progressive change. In other words, it means that the left has the obligation to regain hegemony, to tread new roads, and to present a plan of progressive changes and join alliances capable of doing that. We in the European Parliament, and I had the honor to be among the co-founders 3.5 years ago, established the Progressive Alliance in the European Parliament. Despite our differences, EMPs from the left, the Greens and the Socialists, that finally decided to break free from their coexistence with neoliberalism and the right. This is the road we need to tread, and of course we need to keep this federal character and variegated character of the European left. Our comrade Maite was very right to have said so. We need to foster this dialogue. The Progressive Caucus of the European Parliament some weeks ago had Gabi Zimmer, the Greens, Ska Keller, and the Socialist president sit at the same table and discuss. And there was an agenda for them to discuss. And a week ago, we sent to the candidate presidents of the Commission, among whom Nico and Violeta Tomic, a proposal with 10 different points. And we asked the progressive candidates to take a clear position on them. Stability Compact, a corset compact like the one we have today, or a compact that will give an impetus to the economy. Management and European policy for the refugee crisis and not racism. Strong policies of cohesion, gender equality, enhancement of transparency and accountability, democratic accountability. We can open roads, and I believe that we have an obligation here in Greece to be pioneers in this effort. And I am optimistic that both Nico and Violeta Tomic will follow the footsteps of Alexis Tsipras, and after the European elections will have a stronger European left Eurogroup and will seriously broach the topic of a progressive caucus, fostering progressive radical change for the whole of Europe and every country separately. Suffice that we fight with self-confidence and optimism. Thank you.
Right, after thanking Dimitris Papadimoulis as well, it is a great occurrence that all speakers were much shorter in their delivery than we anticipated. So although we started late, we managed to finish exactly on the scheduled time of completion. So with a great surprise, we'd like to thank you. I should like to remind you that this is a 2-day conference. We continue tomorrow with very interesting panels. You can find our leaflet outside so as to see who speaks when and about what. Thank you once again for being here.